Next up is a film hailed as the peak of 19+ rated cinema in South Korea over the past 30 years. A masterpiece that easily ranks among the very best in the history of Korean crime films. Its mind-bending twists put 90% of other Korean thrillers to shame, truly showing what it means when people say, "You won't know who the killer is until the very end." It's also the career-defining work of the legendary Korean actor Sol Kyung-gu. Memoir of a Murderer. The male lead, Byung-soo, was once a feared serial killer decades ago, but after one killing, on his way home, he got into a car accident that nearly wiped out all his memories of murder, leaving him only with the knowledge that he used to be a serial killer. Since then, Byung-soo has drifted through more than 10 years in a fog, suffering frequent memory loss to the point he can't even put his shoes on the right feet. Doctors have diagnosed him with dementia. Sometimes, when he gets lost, his daughter Eun-hee has to pick him up from the police station. One day, after bringing him home, Eun-hee got distracted by a TV news report about a body recently found by the riverside. While she was glued to the screen, Byung-soo had silently walked up behind her. When he saw the report himself, he rushed to his room, grabbed his shoes, and checked the soles. He feared he might have killed someone and forgotten about it. Luckily, there was no mud, but before he could relax, he saw Eun-hee heading out to a classmate's birthday party, so he hurried over to warn her that there was a killer in the neighboring town. Eun-hee pouted and said, "It's not that easy to run into a killer." After she left, Byung-soo sat down at his computer. Because of his memory lapses, even entering his password took several tries. He kept the computer password protected because it contained his most important memories, including records of his past killings. To cope with his memory loss, Byung-soo recorded every day's events on the computer, so he could review them whenever his mind went blank. While writing down that day's entry, he suddenly remembered being abused as a child. When he was young, Byung-soo's father was a violent drunk who would beat him and his sister. Slaps were just the warm-up once he was on the ground. The kicks came next, and his sister could only watch helplessly. After kicking him, his father would drag him into a room to keep beating him. That night, unable to take it anymore, Byung-soo smothered his father to death and quietly buried him. From then on, he waited at home for the police to come, but to his surprise, no one ever suspected a thing. That's when he realized there were many others living in misery like him, that the police couldn't be relied on, and that the world needed a killer of justice. So he began targeting people like his father, killing them one by one. Every victim was buried in the same bamboo grove, and he called it taking out the trash. After finishing his writing, Byung-soo recorded the day's events on a tape recorder, so if he forgot again, he could quickly play it back to know what had happened recently. To help with his dementia, Eun-hee signed him up for a poetry class, so he went. The instructor read aloud from a poem he had written, but it was all about life and death, and the instructor mocked him as a delusional old man. Then the instructor suddenly asked if Byung-soo had ever killed anyone. Byung-soo stayed silent, staring directly at him, and the instructor, realizing his mistake, broke into loud laughter as the whole room joined in mocking him. After the class ended, a woman named Yeonju approached him, saying she loved his poetry, especially his metaphors about death. Byung-soo told her they weren't metaphors, they were facts. Hearing that only made Yeonju more intrigued. Thinking he was fascinating, seeing her reaction, Byung-soo panicked and ran, driving away in his car. Just as he was about to record the day's events, he slammed into the car ahead, bursting open its trunk. So he got out of the car and walked up to the other vehicle to check the damage. Staring at it, he froze inside. Wrapped up, seemed to be a body, with blood steadily dripping onto the ground. Before the other driver got out, Byung-soo quickly dabbed some of the blood with a cloth and slipped it into his pocket. The man then got out and walked up to Byung-soo, the two staring each other down until the man broke the silence, closed the trunk, and said it was just a deer that had suddenly darted into the road, adding that if Byung-soo was fine, they should just call it even. But Byung-soo wasn't about to let it go. He was certain it was a corpse, and the man was likely the serial killer terrorizing the area. For Eun-hee's safety, he tried to get the man's contact information and gave him his own card, but the man just took it and drove off into the fog without giving anything in return. Byung-soo could only watch him disappear, then pulled out his recorder to document everything. At home, to confirm his suspicion, he had the blood tested just as he thought. It was type O. That meant the bag definitely contained a body. But Byung-soo also knew that a killer's instincts were razor sharp. If he could recognize the man as a murderer, then maybe the man had recognized him as well. And with the man being so close, what if one day Eun-hee became his next victim? So after leaving, Byung-soo went straight to a phone booth and made an anonymous tip, reporting the man's license plate. What Byung-soo didn't know was that the man he'd met that day was actually a police officer named Tae-ju. And just as Byung-soo suspected, whenever Tae-ju encountered a woman during a case, he would lure her to a secluded spot and kill her in the most brutal way possible. The police quickly traced the plate back to Tae-ju and went straight to him.
네? 네가 죽인 거냐? 네 차 트렁크에 시체를 싣고 다니는 거 부녀자 연쇄 살인범이도야 임마.
Seeing this, Tae-ju simply smiled. Later, while Byung-soo was cooking, the phone suddenly rang, but it took him a while to find it, because he had accidentally fried it in a pan, thinking it was part of his lunch. When he finally picked up, the caller was none other than Tae-ju, thanking him for the concern and saying they'd checked the blood in the trunk was deer blood. Hearing this left Byung-soo stunned. He had clearly used a public phone to make the report. So how did they get his number? Tae-ju explained that the car's owner had given them Byung-soo's business card. Still, Byung-soo trusted his instincts. If the police couldn't be counted on, he'd investigate himself. That night, he returned to the site of the crash. Thinking like a killer, he asked himself where he would dump a body, then followed his gut. Sure enough, before long, he pulled a corpse from the lake. The bag around it was the same one he'd seen in Tae-ju's trunk. The next day, the case was all over the news, and Tae-ju watched quietly. After work, he went to stand outside Byung-soo's shop. At that moment, Eun-hee walked by. Seeing Tae-ju at the door, she assumed he was there to get treatment for the kitten in his arms. From the way she addressed him, Tae-ju learned she was Byung-soo's daughter. After Eun-hee left, Tae-ju's gaze followed her. That night, he drove up to her as she was walking home in the dark. Eun-hee, having heard from her friend that Tae-ju was a police officer, had no reason to be wary and got into his car. Fortunately, nothing happened along the way, but as soon as she arrived home, Byung-soo suddenly lunged out, grabbing her by the neck. Only when she gasped, "Dad, did he let go?" Standing there in shock, he hurried back to his room, knowing his memory was slipping more and more, but his killer's instincts hadn't faded. He feared that the car accident might be something he imagined and that he himself might be the real murderer. The next day, he visited his sister, who was now a nun. Byung-soo told her he had dementia and didn't want to burden or harm Eun-hee, so he wanted to stay with her for a while, but his sister said nothing. Instead, she began to pray. Seeing this, Byung-soo understood, set down his sushi, and left, heading to his poetry class again. After class, as expected, Yeonju followed him. It was obvious she had already fallen for Byung-soo before he could even get into the car. She climbed in first. Byung-soo, helpless, simply drove away, while Yeonju kept inviting him to see a movie, each time met with rejection. When she asked if he had any hobbies besides writing poetry, his answer was simple: killing people. But right after saying it, he slammed on the brakes outside. He had just seen Eun-hee in the arms of a man. He jumped out, pulled her away, and came face to face with Tae-ju. Tae-ju introduced himself as Eun-hee's boyfriend and as a police officer. Byung-soo had clearly suffered another memory lapse. He felt like he'd seen the man before, but couldn't place him. Seeing this, Yeonju quickly stepped in to explain things to Eun-hee.
젊은 사람들은 젊은 사람들끼리, 우리는 우리끼리. 그쵸?
Before Eun-hee could even process what was happening, Yeonju had dragged Byung-soo away, but with his memory gone again, Byung-soo didn't even recognize Yeonju. So after driving for a while, he simply dropped her on the roadside. He then pulled out his tape recorder and noted down what had just happened: that Eun-hee had a boyfriend named Tae-ju, who was a police officer. Later, he met up with his friend Byung-man, a detective, for a meal, but Byung-soo had forgotten that during their last meeting, he'd asked Byung-man to check a license plate Tae-ju's car. So when Byung-man got back into his own car after eating, he casually said that the plate belonged to a colleague of theirs named Tae-ju. Hearing the name, Byung-soo had no idea what he was talking about. Byung-man realized Byung-soo had forgotten again, so he didn't press the issue and drove off. But moments later, Byung-soo thought, wasn't that the name of his daughter's boyfriend? He took out his recorder, listened to the tape, and the memory came rushing back. Tae-ju was the killer. Panic hit instantly. Knowing Eun-hee could be in danger, he drove off to find her, but Eun-hee was at the cinema, and when she answered his call, she simply said she was watching a movie and hung up. Byung-soo rushed into the theater, searching hall by hall, with people staring at him like he was crazy. After a long search, he finally found the hall she was in, only to suddenly lose his memory again, sit down, and start watching the film. When the movie ended, he realized he had no idea why he was there, until it finally hit him: he'd been looking for Eun-hee all along. Back home, he exploded at her, telling her to stay away from Tae-ju because he was a killer, but Eun-hee insisted she knew exactly what he was talking about except, in reality, Tae-ju had told her he thought Byung-soo was the murderer. She explained that earlier, Tae-ju had asked why her father had been at that pond near the road where the accident happened, and she guessed he was just passing by since it was close to the bamboo grove. But the truth was, Byung-soo had been to that pond and she admitted how terrified she'd been when she had to clean the mud off his shoes. Hearing this, Byung-soo knew Tae-ju had deceived her, but without proof, he couldn't convince her, so the next day, he took the blood-stained cloth to Byung-man, telling him to test it should match the victim's blood, making it proof that Tae-ju was the killer. Byung-man didn't say much, knowing Byung-soo's dementia, only promising to have it tested, but warning it would take a week for results. After handing over the evidence, Byung-soo went to find Eun-hee, who was just about to go on a date with Tae-ju. He pulled her into his car, then confronted Tae-ju directly, warning him to stay away from Eun-hee and if he came near her again, he'd bury him where no one could ever find him. Back in the car, he told Eun-hee she was not to see Tae-ju for a week. After that, whether she wanted to date or marry him, he wouldn't interfere. He locked her inside the house and prepared syringes filled with a lethal dose, making it clear he had no intention of sitting back and waiting for the test results. That night, he began tailing Tae-ju, watching from a building opposite his apartment. He stayed fixed on the window for hours, even urinating into a bottle so he wouldn't have to leave. But what he didn't know was that Tae-ju had already spotted him and would give him no chance to strike. As the night dragged on, Byung-soo's face began twitching. Then, in a daze, he accidentally drank from the bottle containing his own urine, a sure sign that another memory lapse was about to hit. When he came to, he was back home, with no memory of Tae-ju at all. Now, Tae-ju was on the verge of marrying Eun-hee. Byung-soo still felt they'd met before, so he asked Tae-ju directly if this wasn't the first time. Tae-ju admitted it wasn't, that every time they met, Byung-soo had given them his blessing. Hearing this, Byung-soo immediately excused himself and returned to his room. He had been pretending the whole time and remembered warning Tae-ju to stay away from his daughter. But now, he couldn't risk doing anything rash in front of Eun-hee. When Tae-ju left, Byung-soo noticed marks on Eun-hee's neck, finger-shaped bruises. He assumed Tae-ju had done it, not realizing they were from his own hands. He grew furious, demanding to know why she had gone to see Tae-ju when they had agreed to wait a week. But she insisted that Tae-ju had been brought to the house by Byung-soo himself. At night, Byung-soo met Byung-man to ask if the blood test was ready. Byung-man told him it wasn't human blood at all, it was animal blood, then handed over the report and left. Byung-soo stood frozen. This was impossible. He had tested it himself and confirmed it was type O human blood. If Byung-man was telling the truth, could the killer actually be him? The thought left Byung-soo stunned. As Byung-soo's thoughts drifted, he dozed off only to wake and find himself tied up, with a man sitting in front of his computer. That man was Tae-ju. He had already opened Byung-soo's files and was altering them, rewriting his journals and, in effect, rewriting his memories. Tae-ju told him he'd nearly been caught because of Byung-soo, but fortunately, he had switched up the blood sample before it went to the lab. Hearing this, Byung-soo was furious, but there was nothing he could do. He was completely bound. Flipping through the digital diary, Tae-ju even spotted entries mentioning Yeon-ju, finding it amusing that she was still alive. He picked up Byung-soo's phone and called her, planning to lure her out. Seeing this, Byung-soo panicked and blurted that it was a wrong number, terrified that Tae-ju would kill her too. After hanging up, Tae-ju picked up a vial that had fallen to the floor. It was one of Byung-soo's lethal injections. He said he'd just figured out how to kill Eun-hee. He'd used Byung-soo's own drug, letting him take the blame for her death, as well as for the other murders. Byung-soo exploded in rage, but before he could act, Tae-ju knocked him unconscious. When he woke, he was sitting in front of his computer. He rushed out to find Eun-hee. Thankfully, she was still in her bedroom, untouched. Ignoring her protests, he packed her things and sent her to her aunt's house, his sister's, insisting his sister take care of her. That night, Byung-soo began tailing Tae-ju. The man drove to an unfamiliar area, and Byung-soo followed all the way to a secluded house. He slipped inside, hoping to ambush him, but the place was empty. While searching, he found a camera and inside was a video of Yeon-ju begging for her life. With this evidence in hand, Byung-soo took the camera to Byung-man and told him about the car accident and the body he'd seen. Byung-man said nothing at first, but moments later, a car pulled up. It was Tae-ju. Byung-man went to speak with him. Then the two confronted Byung-soo, asking if he had called and arranged to meet Yeon-ju 4 days ago. They even claimed the phone record showed a call from his number, and that his fingerprints would be all over the camera. Hearing this, Byung-soo realized Tae-ju was framing him. That call had been made by Tae-ju himself. He lunged forward to attack him, but Byung-man restrained him. Tae-ju then asked where Eun-hee was. He said he hadn't been able to reach her for 4 days. Byung-soo smiled, confident she was safe, but Byung-man grew alarmed. If Tae-ju hadn't seen her in days, she could be in danger. He pressed Byung-soo for her location, saying if he didn't tell, he'd have to lock him up. Reluctantly, Byung-soo revealed he had sent her to her aunt's. At that, Byung-man froze. Byung-soo's sister had been dead for years. Byung-soo refused to believe it and tried to call her, but there was no number in his contacts. Shocked, he rushed to the convent where she'd lived only to find it long abandoned, the sushi he'd once left still sitting untouched. Memories came flooding back. His sister had hanged herself shortly after he killed their father, and the last person he'd killed was his own wife. After discovering she was having an affair, Eun-hee wasn't even his biological daughter. On the day of the car accident, he'd planned to kill her too. That was when his memory lapses first began, leaving him wandering in confusion for decades. Meanwhile, police were combing through his bamboo grove, unearthing body after body, including Eun-hee's mother and Yeon-ju. At home, Byung-soo spotted his tape recorder and remembered pressing record the night Tae-ju tied him up. If it hadn't been a hallucination, the tape should contain Tae-ju's voice. But before he could check, 2 officers burst in to arrest him. Byung-soo fought them off, grabbed the recorder, and fled. The world around him seemed to fold in on itself, triggering a vivid flashback he remembered that day. Pulling Eun-hee into Tae-ju's car, mistaking it for a taxi. His sister had never been there at all. Snapping out of it, Byung-soo called Byung-man, saying Tae-ju had taken Eun-hee. He then played the tape of that night's events.
김병수 씨가 내 살인죄까지 몽땅 뒤집었으면 천천히 생각해 볼게요.
When Tae-ju appeared, the young man was rattled. This was almost enough to confirm that he was the real killer. Composing himself, the young man began looking for the right moment and quietly followed Tae-ju. Soon, Tae-ju arrived at a small cabin in the woods. Eun-hee was inside. Walking in, Tae-ju bluntly told her that her mother hadn't simply gone missing. She'd been killed by Byung-soo long ago, and her remains had just been dug up. All of this was overheard by Byung-man outside, but then, Byung-man's phone rang, startling him so much he retreated into a storage room before answering. It was Byung-soo, still on his way. As Byung-man was about to light a cigarette, Tae-ju suddenly appeared behind him. Before he could react, Tae-ju wrapped an arm around his neck and strangled him to death. On the call, Tae-ju threatened Byung-soo if he came any closer, he would kill Eun-hee. Just then, Eun-hee appeared in the doorway. Having heard the noise, seeing the body on the ground, she froze in shock. She turned and ran, but after only a few steps, Tae-ju caught her. Catching hold of Eun-hee, he revealed his true self. His skull was slightly misshapen from being struck by his mother when he was a child. His father used to beat his mother, and when young Tae-ju once tried to stab his father to protect her, his mother smashed him with a hot iron, scolding him for daring to raise a hand against his dad. From that day, he grew to hate women, killing them whenever he had the chance. But before he could continue, Eun-hee had slipped away. He ran outside to search only to be hit head-on by Byung-soo, who floored the gas pedal and knocked him to the ground. Byung-soo rushed inside, frantically searching the room until he found Eun-hee huddled in a corner. But at that moment, his memory failed again. Tae-ju stepped in, smirking, and began coaxing Byung-soo to reveal where Eun-hee was hiding. In his confused, puppet-like state, Byung-soo pointed straight to her hiding spot. Tae-ju pulled out a silk scarf, ready to strangle him, but Byung-soo broke free at the last second, and the 2 men erupted into a brutal fight. They battled for 2.5 minutes, trading savage blows, until Byung-soo pinned Tae-ju to the floor, choking him and smashing a glass bottle into his chest over and over. When it was over, the police finally arrived, taking both Byung-soo and Eun-hee away. The scene shifted to a hospital, where an officer was questioning Byung-soo about what had happened. Everything we had seen was Byung-soo's account until the officer asked where Tae-ju was, and whether he'd escaped. Because no body had been found in the house, Byung-soo claimed he couldn't remember. The officer sighed. After all, Byung-soo had dementia and often forgot things he didn't want to remember. He also mentioned that the tape recorder Byung-soo kept talking about had never been found, and wondered if the whole story had been made up. Before leaving, the officer noted that Eun-hee still hadn't spoken a word, as if she'd lost her memory, and asked if Byung-soo had anything else to say. He stayed silent, so the officer left. Outside, one of his subordinates brought over a medical report, proof of whether Byung-soo actually had dementia. The officer didn't even bother to look, but the curious subordinate pulled out the X-ray to check.
치매가 원래 다른 거야?
Moments later, Byung-soo was released without charges. As he stepped outside, his face began twitching in that familiar way, a sign of his memory lapses. And then the truth flooded back. It had all been Byung-soo. The dismemberment case, his work, the car crash, he'd swapped roles in his mind, casting Tae-ju as the killer. Byung-man's death? Strangled by Byung-soo. Tae-ju? Killed and dumped into the sea. The head injury he described for Tae-ju? It was his own. As everything came to light, a devilish smile spread across Byung-soo's face, and that's where the story ends.